George Galloway and the mother of all talk shows, guaranteed to destroy any weapons of mass deception.
Welcome to the mother of all talk shows with me, George Galloway, on WBAI, serving New York and the tri-state area.
People of America, this is the President of the United States. You are listening to George Galloway and the mother of all talk shows. George is a Scotsman, unlike me, an Irishman. Enjoy.
Good morning, New York and the tri-state area. My apologies for a few seconds delay in getting on the air. Complications of the ISDN line from which I'm broadcasting in London, and I hope the quality is clearer than ever. Sounds like it's hot in the United States. It hasn't started here yet, summer, Ife. I can assure you of that. It's been the wettest year in the history of British meteorology. It's overcast politically as well as climatically. The dark clouds of the Eurozone near collapse are still lingering over the whole of the European continent. And though Great Britain is not a part of the Eurozone, it sure is affected by the instability therein. So we'll be talking about that, no doubt. We'll be talking about the Middle East, where the New York Times, in a rare mistake yesterday, reported that Hosni Mubarak, the 33-year dictator of Egypt, was dead. Turns out that, as Mark Twain said, the reports of Mubarak's death were greatly exaggerated. Is he close to death, or is it all a ploy to get out of jail quick? Is it all a part of the creeping coup d'etat which is taking place in Egypt? The parliament has been dissolved by the military junta in control of the country's events. A narrow victory, perhaps, will be announced tomorrow for the Muslim Brotherhood's presidential candidate, Dr. Morsi, a majority of just a couple of percent. If the Muslim Brotherhood's claim turns out to be founded, it may very well be that the military junta have decided to go for broke and declare the Falul, the remnant of the Mubarak regime, Mr. Shafiq, as the winner, in which case there will be greater revolutionary fervour on the streets of Cairo, Alexandria, Port Said, Ismailia, and many other parts of the country. We'll be discussing what's happening in Egypt. The military have taken sweeping powers to control the economy, the budget, and everything that a parliament would do, because they have just abolished the parliament. On the fiat of the judiciary in Egypt, every single one of them appointed by the dictatorship of Hosni Mubarak. The military are going to run the parliamentary elections again. Nobody knows when, and nobody knows how, and nobody knows how fairly. So all of that is up for grabs in the United Kingdom. Also, we have a big dominating story here. That is the flight of Julian Assange into the Ecuadorian embassy and his bid to get political asylum to avoid extradition to Sweden. On the face of it, a very puzzling move, not least, no doubt, for those friends of his who put up the £250,000 English in bail money, who have now, at a stroke, lost it all, as he is in breach of his bail conditions. Is it about an unwillingness to face what I've always believed were trumped-up sex charges in Sweden, or is it because he has reason to fear being extradited from Sweden to the United States of America, like so many others from these islands over the last period of the one-sided extradition treaty signed by the Tony Blair government with the United States without the knowledge or consent of the British Parliament or people? Perhaps he doesn't want to end up like Bradley Manning, allegedly his source for many of the WikiLeaks material. Bradley Manning is almost literally under the thumbscrews, naked in a cell, facing 99 years of penal servitude. Maybe Assange just doesn't fancy that. Maybe he'd prefer to stay in the Ecuadorian embassy. What do the Ecuadorians think of it? What's it going to do to Ecuador's relations with Britain, with the EU, and above all, with the United States? Do they care? Have they a reason to care? All of these will be subject of the mother of all talk shows today, along with, of course, the hardy perennial of what's going to happen in November in your fine country, sea to shining sea. So this is George Galloway. This is the mother of all talk shows. Aoife, as always, making it possible, handling everything in New York. All I do is talk and opine. She does all the difficult work, and without her, there wouldn't be a show. She was cross with me a few minutes ago. That's why I'm buttering her up now. Aoife, do we have a first call?
Yes. We have Generalis from Staten Island.
Generalis, always great to hear from you in Staten Island. Go ahead, sir.
Hi, Mr. Galloway.
Hi.
Glad to hear you. I'd like to talk about, I know you can share some insight with us on political ads on the radio and TV and how it's a conditioning tool where things are repeated over and over and over. Example, back in the day, downtown Brooklyn record store opens at 9 o'clock in the morning. They got a speaker outside, and they begin to play a new musical record over and over. After the third or fourth play, you might think, well, it's not a very good record. Maybe I could do better than that. But come the 50th or 60th repetition, if you're still standing, you now hold a copy because you went in and bought something that you didn't want.
Well, I wouldn't.
Now,
would you? Would you, Generalis? I wouldn't. I mean, some of the biggest hit records, I now hate them because I've heard them too many times. So it wouldn't work with me. Let me tell you this.
In the name of free will, I want to say to you, you can translate this again to Americans. How do you let yourselves be so easily manipulated? Please, George.
Well, as Lincoln said, you can't fool all of the people all of the time, but it may be that you can fool enough of the people enough of the time. Maybe that's what they're banking on. Maybe that's what they're doing. I have to tell you, we have no political advertising in radio or in television. It's illegal. And I think the political system is the better for that. Because, of course, the outspend in Wisconsin, for example, for the right was 17-1. They spent 17 times as many dollars on the recall election as the Democrats were able to spend. So turning politics into a rich man's sport is not a good idea. We also have very, very restrictive expenditure levels on parliamentary elections. We can't spend more than about $12,000 getting elected to Parliament, which is very, very low. In fact, it's a struggle to stay within it. But I support that system because it means that you cannot be outgunned financially by rich candidates who can brainwash the public at least for 3-4 weeks, even if it's all lies. So in this respect, at least I claim superiority for this side of the Atlantic. Generalis, thanks very much indeed.
Aye, sir.
As always, for a wonderful call. Aoife, do I have a second?
Yes, you have Philip from Westchester, Pennsylvania.
Philip in Pennsylvania. I didn't know we reached that far. Go ahead, sir.
Hello, Mr. Galloway. How are you doing?
Good, thanks. Nice to hear from you.
Yes, if you don't mind, I didn't get a chance to call in last week, but I did want to revisit Wisconsin, if you don't mind.
Yes, go ahead.
My concern is I'm not sure how people, the working class, are so easily divided. I mean, if you don't know, Scott Walker is on YouTube. He's brazen. He's actually telling one of his billionaire donors that he means to, defeat the labor movement, take away collective bargaining by divide and conquer. Those are his own words, verbatim. And he knows he's being filmed, by the way, so he's brazen. And so I just don't understand. And he got 38% of the union vote, although I suspect those were private union voters. So I don't understand how, people with, like interests can be so easily divided.
Well, Marx dealt with this in his magnificent treatise when he talked about the concept of false consciousness. People can be induced for a time, at least for a long time in the history of a man or woman's life, into falsely identifying with people whose interests they do not share. Indeed, people whose interests are the diametric opposite of theirs. And that happens in every country where the vote has been won. Parties and individuals who actually act openly, brazenly, in your words, against the interests of people can nonetheless, for a time at least, count on their support because of their false identification with their betters. their false belief that their betters can run things better than their peers, and that the working people cannot govern themselves, and that these gods, these Adonises who have destroyed Wall Street and destroyed Main Street and destroyed the City of London are somehow nonetheless born to rule. This is a very strange phenomenon, and you saw it in London, I'm sure, at least fleetingly, just last weekend or the weekend before, where millions of people turned out to cheer a rather glum-looking monarchy whom they didn't elect, cannot remove, and have to pay a fortune to keep in the manner that they have grown accustomed to. Now they got, if they were lucky, a robotic wave from the Queen in return, and yet they stood out there from dawn or before in bitterly cold weather, in torrential rain, in order to get that fleeting glimpse of a very elderly lady and her consort. As false consciousness goes, that takes a bit of beating. And so it exists, and we have to struggle against it to persuade union voters that their interests actually lie with the unions of which they are members, to persuade working people of all kinds, all colours, all creeds, that their interests are the same as each other, irrespective of the cultural, religious, or pigmentation differences between them. And, of course, the ruling elite has many devices to play. One is monarchy, another is race, another is patriotism that Dr. Johnson described as the last refuge of the scoundrel, the flag waving and cheers, with which you can get people to march off to die, never mind to vote for Scott Walker.
I think the big one's nationalism. That's why I support your stance on against the S&P.
Yeah. My country is the future.
It would
and
just be another wedge.
My flag is red. Thanks very much indeed for that call. Aoife, do we have a third?
Yes, you do. You actually have Nick from Seacliff.
Nick and Seacliff, welcome to the show. Go ahead, sir.
Hello, George. Nice
Hi.
to talk to you.
And you, brother.
Yes, I don't know if you remember me. I'm the retired police officer.
Oh, I remember you well. Go ahead, sir. Always a pleasure.
Yes, sir. So the chickens, first of all, congratulations on your election.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Now, the chickens have come home to roost, you know, with WikiLeaks, like cockroaches scattering when the light goes on in the kitchen where there's cockroaches. And everyone's running around and pointing fingers and hiding, which is what most politicians do best.
Yep.
And I had a question for you.
Yep.
This issue of the Federal Reserve Bank and the Bank of England, the association between the two, I thought I had read somewhere that there is still a close association with the Bank of England and the Federal Reserve Bank. Could you comment on that?
I'm not aware of any close association, except, of course, they both support neoliberal economics, and they both face in the same direction. But I'm certainly not aware of any organic connection between the two, and I'd very much doubt if there was one.
I have to research that further, but I thought you might know, but I wasn't sure myself, but it sounded a little far-fetched.
I doubt it. There are many people who, not you of course, who misunderstand the nature of the Bank of England, who imagine that it's some kind of privately owned conspiracy. It is entirely under the aegis of the elected government of the day. The problem is the elected government of the day also supports the same neoliberal model in economics as the bank does. So there are never really any significant differences between them. That's the reason they act in concert. But it does give me the chance to dilate for a moment on the G20. And I'm asking, is the G20 any more than the Bilderberg Group with cameras in?
That's what it is.
It seems to me exactly the same group of people representing more or less exactly the same point of view. There are one or two dissident noises off, but they're marginal. The people who are calling the shots at the G20 are the same people that practice at the Bilderberg Group, don't you think?
Absolutely.
Just that we don't get to see what happens in the Bilderberg Group, but we don't need to because we see it all played out in the G20 when it meets.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much
On the
indeed.
money as always, sir. Thank you, sir.
Yes, follow the money as always. This is the mother of all talk shows, where there's no expense spared, absolutely no expense expended of any kind. It's George Galloway. It's WBAI.
Here he is, comrades. George Galloway and the mother of all talk shows, guaranteed to destroy any weapons of mass deception.
Thanks, Ife. Do we have a fourth caller?
Actually, yes, you do. You have Eve from Kings County.
Eve in Kings County, go ahead, please.
How are you, George? It's E, like the letter E.
I beg your pardon, brother. I keep making that mistake. Go ahead.
That's okay. It just shows that you're still human. In any event, I wanted to open this up with something Vince McMahon had said. And he's in a position to know, since his job is to convince us of the unreality of wrestling. He said that whoever said that you can't fool all of the people all of the time was a damn fool. And he's into politics too, like his wife and stuff. But the purpose of my call today was to highlight Julian Assange. I was looking at a program with the director of the Center for the Constitutional Rights, Michael Ratner. He has his own show there, Law and Disorder. He was saying basically that what Mr. Assange is facing is what Bradley Manning is facing, basically life imprisonment, torture, and the whole deal being treated as an enemy combatant, which is a vague, made-up category. Because if he was a prisoner of war, he'd have to be given rights. If he was a regular criminal prisoner, as they would allege he would be, he'd have to be given rights. But he'd be treated as an enemy combatant, an espionagist, and inciting terrorism and all that other nonsense.
That's right. They'd be as well to take him to Guantanamo Bay, give him an orange suit, now that it hasn't closed despite Obama's promise.
Mm-hmm. So, I wanted to know pretty much what was your what were your thoughts?
Well, I'm sure I have not ever spoken to Julian Assange. I have no contact with him at all. He doesn't strike me as a particularly warm and lovely person, but that's not what he does. What he does is expose secrets that the rich and powerful who rule the earth don't want us to know. And for that, I award him a medal. I never believed these charges against him had any substance, at least not any substance that would warrant extradition and trial. He's not even been charged with any offence in Sweden, so why extradite him to face charges that haven't even been laid? He, I'm sure, is resisting extradition to Sweden, which is a pretty civilized country. As far as Western capitalist countries go, it's probably one of the best. It on the face of it seems odd that he should resist extradition there from Britain, which has, as far as I can see, a less good record of protection of people's liberties and so on. But I'm sure that the reasoning is, as I said at the beginning, that he doesn't fancy ending up like Bradley Manning, being held in conditions which can only be described as torture. And Manning allegedly only leaked the information to Assange. How much more condign would be the punishment for the man who actually published to the world those secrets? And you might think it's far-fetched that Sweden would extradite him, but I don't think it's far-fetched at all. The long arm of the United States, even in its declining phase, is still very long and very strong. And who knows what pressure they could exert upon the Swedish authorities to extradite Assange to the United States. Whether or not the seeking of refuge in the Ecuadorian embassy is going to work, I don't know. I don't know how you get from the embassy to Heathrow Airport to fly to Ecuador. Maybe in a very large diplomatic bag, maybe by being declared an Ecuadorian diplomat, maybe just sneaking to a private airfield somewhere in disguise and taking off. I don't know how it's going to work. We may be in for a long standoff at the Ecuadorian embassy, who I must say have shown great sang-froid, have showed great courage in facing up to the potential consequences by giving Mr. Assange at least temporary refuge in their embassy in London. I'm sure there's a crowd gathering outside that embassy now, and it'll soon become one of the most famous buildings, landmarks in the land. Thanks very much for the call, my friend. Aoife, give me a fifth one, please.
Yes, you have a Zippy from Manhattan.
Zippy in Manhattan. What a wonderful ring that has to it. Go ahead, Zippy.
Hello. I applaud you for your honesty, for your equanimity, and for being a warrior in this world where there's so much injustice. And
thank you, brother.
Thank you. And last week, I just wanted to go into something. It kind of touches on Egypt and about this kind of America. In America, I mean, it's pretty obvious that the Europeans came here and they destroyed the American Indian culture. And it was a culture, and I'm sure it had a lot of depth to it. And, I mean, it still exists, but it's pretty much, the American Indians were pretty much annihilated.
Yeah.
That's a known thing. And getting into annihilation of culture, in Tunisia, where the man set himself on fire, and they said that was the instigation for the Arab Spring.
Yep.
That was one man who set himself on fire, who did something, and it caused this thing, and it's a shame the way it's turning out. It's really a shame. You touched on that. So my thing is this. It's about the Tibet situation. There have been like over 35 self-immolations of Tibetans. Now, it's not like they're going, we want food. They're basically, upset about their culture being destroyed and about being forced to speak Chinese or whatever it is that's going on there. And it's also probably about food. But let's just say that a lot of it has to do with their culture. And part of the Buddhist culture is that detachment from the body, or the body as a non-self. And as a bodhisattva, it sounds like a horrible thing, suicide, but it's not actually a suicide. It's actually giving up one's body, which they consider empty, and will go into the next, phase of whatever the spirit goes to as a protest. And yet, 35 self-immolations, and I see it in the Times once in a while, but it's like, obviously, it must be a really horrible situation in Tibet. Yet, one person in Tunisia, does this thing, and there's a whole revolution. And yet, I think it's drastic. I think it's a little bit like out there, and I don't think anything is going to change until the Chinese people say, stand up to their own rights. And at that point, maybe, something will happen with the CCP, which I call the Communist Mafia Party. In either case, I just would like you to comment on that, and that's basically, what I called.
Well, thanks for the call. I mean, I'm not with you on any of that, really. Let me deal with the tactic of self-immolation first. I'm wholly opposed to it. I'm against self-slaughter. The Lord has set his canon against it, as was said in Hamlet. And I'm against it, too, for the same reason, that people do not have the right to kill themselves in law in our country, and I think in yours. And in any case, much more importantly, it's a sinful act. It's an act of absolute despair. And of course, it happens, and it happened in Tunisia in all its horror. And of course, some good came out of what was an appalling act of self-immolation, in that it set the political situation in Tunisia on fire, along with the young man who killed himself, and it sparked a revolution throughout the Arab world, which is still going on. And I'm not with you on the point that it's a shame how it's turned out either. It has turned out in Tunisia very well. They have had free elections. My friend Sheikh Rashid Ghanouchi won the elections in a landslide victory with his Ennahda party, and Tunisia, I think, has a bright future as a result of the revolution. The revolution in Egypt has changed a very great deal in that country. It hasn't changed everything, and of course the ruling elite is fighting back. And in other countries, the attempt has been made to hijack these revolutions by the crusader powers, your own, my own, and others. But I don't believe that will succeed in the medium term either. I think that things will never be the same in the Arab world as a result of these revolutions, and that in the medium and long term, everything will be better for the 350 million Arabs who have been living under Western-sponsored dictatorship, almost all of them, for the best part of 100 years, maybe slightly more than that in one or two cases. So I'm not with you on that. But lastly, I'm definitely not with you on the subject of Tibet. I believe that Tibet is part of China, that it's always been part of China, and that the Dalai Lama, whose devotees these suicide victims are, is a man who regards himself openly, describes himself openly as a demigod. I have no real empathy with people who think themselves gods. I think there's only one God, and God is God, and no man is a god, let alone the Dalai Lama. I don't believe that the followers of the Dalai Lama are acting in the interests of the people of Tibet. The people of Tibet are not forced to speak Chinese. They are not forced to abandon their culture, their religion, their language. And China is a great country, and the United States is expending a great deal of effort and money into trying to divide China and trying to find a gap in its armor into which they can insert levers to weaken and dislocate China, because it's the overarching foreign policy priority of the United States to check the rise of China, to try and weaken China. And I, for one, will not go along with that. I believe that the Chinese Communist Party, which has lifted more people out of poverty than any regime, any system ever in the history of humankind, deserves credit for having done so. That's not to say there are not improvements, reforms, changes could and should be made in China, as I'm sure they will be in time. But I think if every country in the third world was run by a government as good as the government of the People's Republic of China, then they'd be a lot better off for it. That's my view, Zippy. Sorry it doesn't concur with yours. Aoife, do we have a sixth call?
Yes, you do. You have Hamid from the Bronx.
Hamid in the Bronx, welcome.
Good morning, Comrade Galloway, and congratulations on your recent...
Thank you, brother. I appreciate that.
I just want to make a short point on the G20 that you mentioned. Actually, it's significant to note that for the first time, the Chinese government is the one who's going to make a large financial contribution to the World Bank. I think, in the history of the world finance, this is probably the first time that this kind of financial support is coming from,
Well, they've been strong-armed into it, Hamid. They've given $10 billion, along with Brazil, and I think India also, Mexico. I mean, people are being strong-armed into making these contributions. They're demanding reforms in how the World Bank is run in return, and I hope they get them.
And, I hope as well. And you also have that note on this notion of false conscience. I'm from Iran, and in Iran we have a theocracy in place, and although there was election and we have a so-called president, the real power is what they refer to as the supreme leader.
Yeah.
Well, at this point, it seems to be sort of a combination of a shah, a combination of a king and a ayatollah, and instead of a crown, he just has a, So, in any instance, as I'm sure you're aware of the complexities of Iran, at the same time, we do have a working class which is really under severe repression from internal and external points. And last week, there was a huge mass arrest. So I would like to somehow get some information to you about that, and hopefully,
Well, you can send me information anytime. Anyone can. You can write to me at gallowayg@parliament.uk. You can follow me on Facebook and Twitter, George Galloway MP. And I'm always ready to read anything that anyone sends me, Hamid. I don't agree with your characterization of the situation in Iran. My take is that the majority of Iranians, by no means all, support the political system there. Not everyone has to have the same political system. A revolution brought the Islamic Republic into being, a revolution that was resisted by the United States and Great Britain, and a revolution that was made necessary by decisions of the United States and Great Britain to overthrow the government of Dr. Mossadegh, democratically elected, left-of-center prime minister, who had the temerity to bring into public ownership, Iranian ownership, the oil resources of his own country and therefore was overthrown in Operation Mongoose, mounted by the CIA and Britain's MI6. So they've got no reason to...
Operation Ajax. And
they've got no reason to... well, it was Mongoose in England. They've got no reason to love Britain and America, who still, 60 years later, are trying to bring the political system down in their own interests. The people of Iran will decide, won't they? The people of Iran, if they...
agree with you as far as the external forces, and obviously we should have no illusions about external forces at all. At the same time, I would ask you to also consider this issue of the ruling class in Iran and how.
Well, I was going to come on to that. The existence of the Council of Guardians and the Supreme Leader, who is now Ayatollah Khamenei, is a product of that revolution, just as Raul Castro is the product of the Cuban Revolution. A revolution took place. I believe the majority of the Cuban people support their system. I believe the majority of the Iranian people support theirs. By no means all in either case. And I look forward to the day when both of those countries are no longer under siege by the very imperialist countries who supported the old regimes, so that we can move in the direction of representative government chosen by the people, removable by the people. But you can't have one without the other, Hamid. That's my point. And as long as Iran is under threat of war, is under the reality of sanctions, then we're not going to get much way in the movement of democracy in either Cuba or Iran. Well, go on.
That is, external forces and external threats are always a objective factor. But as you well know, an outstanding feature of the Iranian Revolution of 1979 was the councils that were created by the workers in every level of the economy, from the oil refineries to the factories to the small shops. And these councils, the workers, and we also have councils in universities and communities in the neighborhoods, they were an effective de facto form of
Soviet is, I think, the word you're searching for. Yeah. Look, Hamid, I would have been with you. I was with you on that. But listen, the left lost the left lost the revolution, Hamid. Hamid.
Islamic councils, right?
Hamid, let me answer you. Hamid, let me answer you. Look, the left
movement is coming back. So
well, if it comes back, good. But the workers are people too, as well as workers. And I'm saying to you that I believe the majority of people, including the workers and the peasants, support the Islamic system.
We don't agree on that point.
Well, neither of us can know for sure, but the mass politics that's practiced in Iran and the revolutionary tradition of the people of Iran seem to me both to be subjective reasons for believing that if the majority of the Iranian people wanted a change in their political system, they know how to bring it about, and they're not doing so. Despite all the external pressure and despite all the external stimulation of revolt in the country. Now, I'm as much in favor of workers' councils as you are, but there was a power struggle in Iran and the left lost it, and we have to just live with the fact that Iran has an anti-imperialist government, and its internal and domestic politics should be determined by the Iranian people themselves, and not by outside agencies intervening within. I'm sure we agree on that point. Hamid, thanks for that call. This is the mother of all talk shows. This is George Galloway. This is WBAI.
There are known knowns. There are known unknowns. Garden knowns. But there are also unknown unknowns. Here's one of them. George Galloway with his mother of all talk shows. Didn't we regime change that guy?
That's me. I was never regime changed. At least only temporarily unhorsed. Ife, do we have another caller?
Yes, you have Patrick from New Rochelle.
Patrick in New Rochelle, welcome to the show. Go ahead, sir.
Hey, Mr. Galloway.
Hi.
Pretty cool. I actually had two questions I wanted to ask you, and I was torn, but one of your earlier callers asked a question, so now I feel free to ask you the second one. In terms of what's taking place in Egypt and with the recent developments in terms of what the military council is doing with power and what's coming out with the presidency, what do you think is left of the revolutionary effort to kind of try to stem the change? And do you think that it's pretty much been co-opted by what's going on right now? And where do you see it ending? Because it just seems like the military council has really consolidated power in virtually all aspects of rule, and it's very hard to see how the people can kind of try to overcome that, because in the end the military is still just going to suppress and repress what may come. So I just wanted to hear your thoughts on that, and whether you think the revolution is truly dead, or if it will overcome this current impasse.
Well, it's very far from dead, Patrick, but whether it can triumph, of course, remains to be seen, and will be a direct product of the effort and the mass which is put into this next phase of the struggle. Revolution, as I've said here often, is a process, not an event. The French Revolution took 10 years. The Bolshevik Revolution, 6 years, until the end of the foreign intervention in the Civil War in the territory of the former Soviet Union. So it's far too early to say that the Egyptian revolution has been defeated. Certain gains have been made that will not be able to be turned back. The masses are in their millions regularly on the streets of Egypt in a way that would simply be inconceivable before the overthrow of the dictatorship. There is a proliferation of media, including self-start, independent media in Egypt that was just illegal before and would have been punishable by torture and death. So these are all harbingers of a revolutionary process still to come. The Muslim Brotherhood have won the presidency, at least they claim that they have won the presidency. We'll see tomorrow what the military junta has to say about that. The parliament has been dissolved, but the last time it was elected, the Islamic parties, two of them, won 75% of the seats within it. Now, the military junta has taken upon itself the power to organize the next parliamentary elections, and those might produce a very different result. But if it produces an incredible, literally incredible result, then this will be a further sign to the masses of Egypt that the revolution is being stolen. Mubarak has been cleared on the most important of the charges that he faced, but he's still in prison, albeit now in a hospital, in a coma, and not dead, as the New York Times reported last evening. He and his two sons, who were intended to inherit power from him, remain in custody, and many former leaders of the old regime remain behind bars and on trial. So in other words, there's still everything to play for. There was 2 steps forward, there has been 1 step back, and it's up to the internal balance of force now as to what the final outcome of this will be. But nothing will ever be the same again, and we'll never, I think, have cause to regret the fact that the Egyptian people, with their 800 martyrs, rose up against their dictatorship in the first place. Thanks very much for that call. Ife, next one, please.
Yes, you have Peter from Spanish Harlem.
Peter in Spanish Harlem. I love saying that. Go ahead.
Okay. I'm concerned about the stop and frisk policy and the response for the big march in New York Sunday. I remember Malcolm X saying that we should go for human rights and not so much for civil rights, because you're putting the ball in the court of the oppressor. And that's where I feel our focus should have been. I feel we should, make it known to other people, or people who are sleeping or whatever, not involved, that this is a human rights violation with all the other oppressive measures associated with racism in America and New York in particular. I feel that with civil rights, I feel money could be made that may, unfortunately, that may be the focus of why, I hate to say it, maybe I feel bad doing it, but Sharpton does not consider talking about human rights so much. And I made a call like I'm doing to you on a radio program where I was able to speak to him. And I was speaking to him so the other people can hear it too, naturally.
Well, it's a very good point that you make. I'm not entirely on top of the issue that you're discussing, but I can guess what the problem is. I can tell you that in the United Kingdom, you're 26 times more likely to be stopped and searched, as we call it, if you have a black face than if you have a white face. And I play a game with myself as I'm driving around London late in the evenings, which I often am. If I see a nice car pulled over by the police, I always know, and I'm almost always right, that the driver is going to be a black man. So I'm well aware of the role that racism plays in law enforcement in my own country, and I'm sure that it's not different in New York. So I wish the march every success, and it's a very noble cause, and the dichotomy that you draw between civil rights and human rights is a very good and a very wise point.
But I just want to add that, as you know, in gentrification, I know it's throughout the world, and beyond race, people being moved out. But with the what we have suffered, or people have suffered, and I'm talking about what I see in New York and other parts of this.
Yeah. Well, thanks for that. Thanks for enlightening me. Anybody know how Charles Barron's doing, by the way, in the bid to be the Democratic Party congressional candidate in New York? He's an old friend of mine. If anyone knows him, pass him my regards and my best wishes for his forthcoming election. Eva, do we have another call?
Yes, you have Willie from Brooklyn.
Go ahead, sir.
Good morning, Mr. Galloway.
Good morning to you in Brooklyn.
Well, first time I called you.
Welcome.
Well, sir, I called you to ask for the greatest gift of my life and the greatest gift, I believe, for Haiti. I need a leader like you to help reforest the country. The country is a desert, and they only need, I believe, just your voice to tell the people, let's reforest the country. Probably with no financial help from you, but the people can do it. Somebody like me cannot do it because people going to think I'm coming with a ploy to steal their money. I don't need any money. I have enough to survive.
By the grace of God, you and me both.
I would like to see the country green all over. When I'm on the plane and I'm about to land, I don't want to see just the empty mountains. I would like to see it with us. This is the greatest gift you would give me, and I believe to Haiti. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, brother. I'm very touched, moved by what you had to say. I'm ready to do my bit as the great-grandson of the only woman in the whole of the 19th century to emigrate from New York to my city of Dundee in Scotland. And if you've ever seen Dundee, and if you've ever seen New York, you'll know how peculiar a decision that was. But that's what she did, and that's why I'm here. But I'm here rather than there, and I have to stay here. But I'm ready to do my bit through WBAI and on speaking tours and so on. If people want to invite me, I'm ready to come. And of course, there's always YouTube. I've got 12,800 videos on YouTube, not one of which I put up myself. You can hear what I've got to say. You can spread it. And you can follow me on Facebook and on Twitter. George Galloway MP is the Facebook page. Thank you very much for a very beautiful call. Aoife, do we have another?
Yes, you have John Pitts from the East Village.
John in the East Village. Oh, I'd like to be there right now. John, go ahead.
Okay, my name is really Pitts, okay? Hey, listen, George, you're a beautiful person. Your insights are on point. Now, I'm black, and I left America to go to Sweden in the 60s when the Vietnam War was going on.
Wow, yeah.
To get my black family out of this damn country so they'll never know the racism that we endure over here. Now, point. How has Sweden fallen into the spear of the United States. When I was over there, they weren't anti-American, but from a moral perspective, the war and a lot of other things America does, Sweden stood against it. And what's this? I mean, they're bringing sex. This is almost a joke over there in Sweden. They're bringing this man back over there on some sex charges. Now, all the things to bring somebody back to Sweden on, sex would be the most ridiculous doggone. They're so far ahead of the rest of the world in that concept. So give me your play on what has happened to Sweden that has fallen into the sphere of America that they would dare to bring this WikiLeaks thing back over there and bring him to America to be waterboarded or something? I mean, God,
well, yeah.
I'm looking forward. I'm going to listen to what you have to say on this because, after living in Sweden, I can't believe that they have flipped to this degree. So.
Well, thank you, brother. A very good call. And of course, Sweden's not the only country that isn't what it was. Canada is another where Vietnam War resistors were welcomed and were given sanctuary. But anyone resisting American wars today who made it to Canada would be sent back by the right-wing neocon government in Canada. So Sweden is not what it was. But to be fair, I should make this point. The Swedes have not given any indication that they will extradite Assange to America, and America has not given any indication that it would seek to have him extradited from Sweden. However, if I were Julian Assange, I'd be very worried about that changing on both fronts, and that's why I presume, I have no direct knowledge, that he's ended up in the Ecuadorian embassy and maybe there for some time. The trumped-up sex charges are ridiculous. He's not charged with raping anyone. He's charged with having sex without a condom with a woman that he'd had sex with before they went to sleep with a condom. She claims that she woke up in the morning and he'd had sex with her again in her sleep without using a condom. Now, that may be bad manners, maybe more than bad manners, maybe shocking sociopathic behavior. But it can't be a crime. It certainly isn't a crime in England. It's not a crime in the United States. But it is apparently potentially a crime in Sweden. And that's what he's charged with. He's charged with having consensual sex with a woman, then having it again, but not wearing a condom. Now, as I say, that may be gross, and I'm sorry if I've put anyone off their breakfast. It may be very, very bad manners indeed. It may reflect very badly on him as a man, certainly as a gentleman, but it doesn't make him worthy of being extradited to face a criminal prosecution there if one ever was mounted, but more importantly, exposing himself still further to extradition to the United States. Eva, do we have time for one more call?
Yes, you actually have Harriet White from Flushing, Queens.
Harry in Flushing and Queens, go ahead, sir.
Harriet.
No, I'm a
Harriet, I beg your pardon.
I'm calling about the stop and frisk policies as well. I know you don't know much about it, but you might know something about slavery. And in this country, it seems that there is a reenactment of slavery going on, and stop and frisk is akin to that. And not only in New York, but all over the country, as well as the disenfranchisement which is going on for black people. But during slavery, slaves, of course, could not move freely, and they had what were called patrollers, which became patrollers, people who stopped the slaves, and they were. Hello?
Yes, I'm listening. I'm riveted.
They were the poor whites who had been the workers for the slave owning classes, but then who became the overseers of the blacks. And the parallel situation in the city is that blacks, the young black people who they're stopping, they cannot move freely. They are in a state of complete limitation to their neighborhoods, to their areas, which is a kind of reenactment of enslavement, because they do not stop and frisk white young men and women, and it is a fact that white young people are more likely to have the kind of drugs that they say that these blacks have.
Well, look, Harriet, I couldn't have put that better myself, and I wouldn't have tried to. It's a magnificent call to end what I hope has been a good show. If you've enjoyed it, bring somebody else next week at the same time in the same place, God willing. Until then, it's The Clash, London Calling.